Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been camping with my group of friends for 8 years now. It started when my oldest daughter was just 3, and over the years we've become this tight-knit camping family. 7 adults, 4 kids between all of us, and we always bring 3 cars because we've got so much gear. The campground charges extra for that third vehicle, but we gladly pay it. We're always under the per-person limit for our site, so everything's legit. The thing about this particular campground is that reservations open exactly 11 months in advance, not 10 months and 30 days, not 11 months and 1 day, exactly 11 months. I learned this the hard way our second year when I tried to book 10.5 months out and everything good was gone. Since then, I set a calendar reminder and I'm online at midnight sharp when those reservations open. Our site is perfect. It's a pull-through site that can handle our friend's 32-foot trailer. It's set way back from the road, faces the woods instead of other campers, and it's huge. Like the kids can play football huge. Everyone who camps there knows it's the best site in the entire campground. That's why I book it 11 months in advance every single year. This year, I was the designated early arrival person. My job was to get there Friday night around 9 p.m. and hold down the fort until everyone else rolled in Saturday morning. I've done this routine so many times I could do it in my sleep, except this time when I pulled into the campground, something was very wrong. Every site was full except for one tiny site that clearly couldn't fit a large trailer, and sitting pretty in our reserved spot was a beat-up camper that looked like it survived the 80s by pure stubbornness. Both my kids were asleep in the back seat after the 3-hour drive, and I was staring at what was obviously going to be a problem. Now this campground is in rural Oklahoma, and let's just say the area has seen better days. When I saw that old camper, I'll admit I was nervous about knocking on the door, but I've lived in Oklahoma my whole life, and I know how to handle these situations. I put on my sweetest southern lady voice and knocked. I apologized for bothering them and politely explained that I had my reservation email showing this was supposed to be my site. The woman who answered looked annoyed that I'd even knocked. She insisted that this was the site they had booked. I asked if I could see their reservation email, suggesting that maybe the campground had double booked us and we could figure it out together. She said they'd look for the email and shut the door right in my face. I stood there for 10 minutes waiting. My kids were stirring in the car, asking where we were, and these people were just ignoring me. Finally, I called the ranger station. They said someone would be out in 30 minutes. After another 10 minutes of waiting, I knocked again and asked if they'd found their email. The woman asked if they needed to go to the website to find it. They didn't even know how to check their own email confirmation. I explained that it should be in their email. She got defensive and asked what I expected them to do, complaining that they had kids sleeping inside. I told her I understood because my kids were also sleeping in the car, but we wouldn't fit in that other tiny site. If we couldn't get into this one, we'd have nowhere to sleep tonight. She just stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. They still couldn't find their email, which was starting to seem mighty suspicious to me. Right about then, my friend pulled up with their big trailer, and thank God the ranger showed up right behind them. Suddenly, like magic, these people found their email confirmation. Shocker. They were supposed to be in that tiny site next door, but Karen wasn't done yet. She turned to the ranger with this pleading voice, explaining that they were supposed to leave tomorrow morning anyway. She begged to just stay here, complaining about how much work it would be to back in a trailer for just one night. I felt bad for them, I really did. And we had plans starting early Saturday, so I tried to compromise. I offered to find somewhere else to sleep that night if they could be out by 7 a.m. the next morning so we could get set up for our full day of activities. She countered by suggesting 11 o'clock since that was the official checkout time. I told her no, explaining that this was our reserved site. I said we were willing to be nice about it, but we had a busy day planned and needed to be set up by 8 a.m. She complained that 7 a.m. was way too early and mentioned their kids again, but reluctantly agreed they could probably manage it. The ranger had clearly dealt with this kind of thing before. He looked at Karen, then at me with my two sleepy kids in the car, then back at Karen. He told her that she needed to move tonight, not wait until morning. When she protested again about having sleeping kids, the ranger pointed right at me and reminded her that I also had sleeping kids. He repeated that they needed to move immediately. Oh, the cussing and grumbling that followed. Karen was muttering about how unfair it was and how they'd been there first and how their kids were going to be upset. Her husband was slamming things around their camper and complaining about having to unhook everything. It took them a solid 45 minutes to get that old trailer backed into the tiny site next door, with lots of dramatic sighing and door slamming. It's now Sunday afternoon and they're still here. Their checkout was supposed to be Saturday morning, but apparently they decided to extend their stay. Their kids have been running wild all weekend, screaming at all hours, and they've got these little rat dogs that they just let run loose around the campground. The sites are spaced pretty far apart with trees between them, so at least it's not terrible, but we can definitely hear them. Yesterday morning, one of their kids screamed across the campground, asking their mom why they weren't in the nice site anymore. And Karen, instead of quietly explaining or maybe walking over to talk to her kid like a normal person, screamed right back that those people over there had taken their site. I was drinking my morning coffee and nearly spit it out. My friend looked at me and just shook her head, saying they should have booked earlier. That became our running joke for the weekend. Every time we heard them complaining about something, the site being too small, having trouble backing in, the kids whining, we'd just look at each other and remind ourselves that they should have booked earlier. The thing is, we always cook way too much food when we camp. It's become our tradition to share with our neighbors. We'll grill extra burgers, make too much chili, buy more s'more supplies than we could possibly use. It's part of what makes camping fun, that community feeling. But this weekend, not a chance. When Karen walked over Saturday evening and made some comment about how good our steak smelled, I just smiled sweetly and told her we'd made just enough for our group. When their kids kept wandering over to our campfire, we politely redirected them back to their parents. My daughter asked me why we weren't sharing like we usually do. I explained that sometimes when people don't treat others with kindness and respect, we don't need to go out of our way to be extra nice to them. It was a good lesson for her about natural outcomes. Sunday morning, the ranger came by to check on things, and when he saw they were still there, he walked right over to their site. I couldn't hear everything, but I definitely caught him mentioning late checkout fees and asking to see their extended reservation. Turns out, they hadn't actually extended their reservation properly. They owed late fees for Saturday night and would owe even more if they didn't leave by noon Sunday. Karen started arguing with the ranger, but he wasn't having any of it. As I write this, they're frantically packing up their stuff, kids crying, dogs barking, the whole dramatic production. Meanwhile, we're sitting in our perfect campsite, enjoying our last few hours of peace before we head home. I've been living with my roommate for 3 years now, ever since we graduated college. We met during our sophomore year when we were both broke computer science majors, surviving on ramen and energy drinks. Back then, we'd stay up all night working on coding projects and complaining about our professors. After graduation, we both struggled to find decent jobs. I spent 6 months doing gig work and living with my parents before landing my current position. My roommate bounced between a few different jobs before settling into his role at a marketing firm. When we finally had stable income, we decided to get a place together. It made perfect sense. We knew each other well, had similar cleanliness standards, and could split costs evenly. Our apartment is small but decent, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to cook at the same time, and thin walls that mean we can hear pretty much everything the neighbors do. The rent is $800 each, plus utilities that usually run about $60 per person monthly. We split everything 50-50, from groceries to cleaning supplies. It's worked perfectly for years. 2 months ago, everything changed when my roommate started dating this new girl. At first, I was happy for him. He'd been single for a while and seemed really excited about her. She started coming over for dinner dates, movie nights, weekend hangouts, normal relationship stuff. She seemed nice enough, polite, friendly, helped clean up after herself when she cooked with him. But gradually, she started staying over more and more. What began as weekend visits turned into weeknights too. Soon she was here 5 or 6 nights a week, showering in our bathroom, cooking in our kitchen, streaming shows on our Netflix account. Our utility bills started creeping up. The bathroom was always occupied when I needed it. The kitchen sink was constantly full of dishes from their elaborate cooking sessions. I tried to be understanding. New relationships are exciting, and I remembered being the same way when I was dating someone seriously. Plus, she wasn't causing any major problems. She was quiet, cleaned up after herself most of the time, and even cooked dinner for all three of us occasionally. Last week, my roommate asked if we could talk after dinner. I figured he wanted to discuss something minor, maybe splitting the increased utility costs or setting up a bathroom schedule. Then he dropped a bombshell. He told me that his girlfriend's lease was ending next month and he was thinking she could move in with us. I nearly choked on my coffee. This wasn't a minor adjustment, this was a complete change to our living situation. I asked him how we would handle rent and everything. He explained that she was between jobs right now, so she couldn't really chip in financially, but she would help out with chores and stuff. I stared at him. We already split chores evenly, and frankly, adding a third person would create more work, not less. I told him I understood she was in a tough spot, but this was a pretty small place, and if she wasn't contributing to rent or utilities, that meant I was essentially subsidizing her living here. My roommate got defensive and told me not to be like that. He said she wasn't some random person but his girlfriend. We were all friends here, and it wasn't like she was going to mooch forever. I pointed out that we didn't know how long temporarily unemployed meant. What if it took her months to find work? I was paying $800 a month plus utilities because I expected to cover half the costs, not a third. He argued that she had cooked for us last week and helped organize the kitchen. She was contributing, he insisted. I told him that cooking dinner twice didn't equal $400 a month in rent. I wasn't trying to be heartless, but this would completely change our living arrangement. The bathroom situation alone would be a nightmare with 3 people. My roommate said I was being so petty about this. He thought I'd be supportive. She was going through a hard time, and instead of helping, I was nickel and diming everything. I explained it wasn't about being petty, but about being practical. If she moved in, she should pay her fair share once she got a job. A third of rent and utilities seemed reasonable. Then he accused me of making her feel unwelcome. He said she'd told him she was worried I didn't like her because I was always so cold when she was here. That stung because I'd actually been trying to be accommodating. I wasn't cold, I was just trying to maintain some normalcy in my own home. I told him I wasn't cold to her, but this was my home too, and I had a right to have a say in who lived here permanently. He just said he thought I was cooler than this and walked off to his room. I could hear them talking in low, angry voices through the thin walls. Over the next few days, the tension was unbearable. She started avoiding me completely when she came over, ducking into his room the moment she saw me. My roommate was giving me the silent treatment except for basic apartment business. The whole place felt hostile. A week later, I came home from work to find her stuff everywhere. Clothes in the bathroom, toiletries covering the sink counter, her food filling up half the refrigerator. She was clearly moving in whether I agreed or not. I asked what was going on. My roommate explained that her lease had ended early, and she'd had to move out that day. I said I couldn't believe he hadn't thought to discuss this with me first. Karen jumped in and told me she knew I didn't want her there, but she literally had nowhere else to go. She promised she'd start job hunting seriously and pay me back once she was working. I explained it wasn't about wanting her there or not, but about making decisions together when it affected all of us. She said she was in crisis mode, and I was worried about splitting costs 3 ways instead of 2. Most people would be happy to help someone in need, she said. My roommate backed her up, saying she was right and I was being really unreasonable about this. I realized they'd planned this whole thing. The early lease end was probably a lie to force my hand. I told them fine, but I wanted it in writing that she'd pay a third of everything once she found work, and I wanted a timeline for when that needed to happen. Karen refused to sign anything. She said that was ridiculous and I was treating her like some kind of criminal. I explained I was treating her like a tenant, which was what she was now. She got angry and insisted she wasn't a tenant but my friend who was going through a hard time. The next month was hell. She made no effort to find work, spending her days on the couch watching Netflix, and ordering food delivery with money she claimed not to have for rent. She left her stuff everywhere, used all the hot water, and started inviting her own friends over without asking. When I brought up the job search, she'd get defensive and claim she was networking or waiting to hear back from applications I never saw her fill out. She acted like I was harassing her for asking basic questions about her employment situation. Things got worse when she started treating me like a third wheel in my own apartment. She'd make passive-aggressive comments about how I was always around when I was just trying to use my own kitchen or living room. She complained to my roommate that I was making her uncomfortable by existing in shared spaces. The final straw came when I got home early from work one day and found her going through my bedroom. She claimed she was looking for the vacuum cleaner, but the vacuum was clearly visible in the hall closet. When I confronted her about it, she got defensive and said I was paranoid. That night, I told my roommate I was done. Either she started paying her share and respecting boundaries, or I was moving out at the end of the month. He accused me of being dramatic and giving ultimatums. Karen chimed in that I was trying to manipulate the situation and force her out when she was vulnerable. I'd had enough. I told them I'd already started looking at other apartments and would be gone in 2 weeks. They could figure out how to cover my portion of the rent themselves. Suddenly, Karen's tune changed completely. She panicked and said she didn't realize I was so serious about this. She offered to start paying something toward rent, maybe $200 a month. I laughed and told her it was too late for negotiations. I'd already put a deposit down on a studio apartment across town. My roommate begged me to reconsider, saying we could work something out. He finally admitted that Karen had been lying about her job search and had actually turned down several positions because they were beneath her standards. Karen got angry at him for throwing her under the bus and started screaming about how neither of us understood what she was going through. She said she shouldn't have to take just any job and that real friends would support her during tough times. I told her that real friends don't lie, freeload, and invade people's privacy. I packed my stuff and moved out that weekend. 2 months later, my old roommate called me. He sounded exhausted and desperate. He told me Karen had never gotten a job and he couldn't afford the full rent anymore. They were getting evicted at the end of the week. Apparently, once I left, Karen had invited 2 of her friends to move into my old room without telling him. They weren't paying rent either, just helping with chores. The apartment had turned into a crash pad for unemployed 20-somethings who spent their days smoking and playing video games. He begged me to move back in and said he'd kick Karen out immediately. I told him I was happy in my new place and wished him luck. He eventually had to move back in with his parents after the eviction. Karen and her friends bounced between different people's couches until they wore out their welcome everywhere. My new studio apartment costs more than my share of the old place, but the peace of mind is worth every penny. I got into martial arts when I was 12 after being bullied at school. My parents enrolled me in karate classes, thinking it would help with my confidence. 20 years later, I'm a third-degree black belt, though most people would never guess it just by looking at me. I keep in decent shape for the job, but I'm not particularly intimidating. The training taught me discipline and self-control more than anything else. The community pool where I work serves a pretty diverse neighborhood. We get families from all walks of life, and most of the time everyone gets along fine. The pool has strict safety rules, and part of my job is making sure everyone follows them. Usually, a polite reminder is all it takes. That Tuesday started like any other summer day. The pool was moderately busy with the usual afternoon crowd, including some teenagers hanging out in the deep end, a few adults doing laps, and several families with young kids in the shallow area. I was doing my regular safety sweep when I noticed something troubling in the 4-foot section. A woman was standing in the water with what appeared to be her daughter, who looked to be around 8 or 9 years old. The little girl was clearly struggling, and I could see her trying to surface for air, but the woman kept pushing her head back down under the water. The kid's face was getting red, and she was starting to panic. I immediately approached them and politely told the woman that her daughter needed to come up for air. The woman looked at me with complete annoyance, like I was interrupting something important. She snapped that her daughter was fine and explained that she was training her for swim team tryouts next month. She said the girl needed to build her lung capacity. I told her I understood she wanted to help her daughter improve, but pointed out that the child was clearly at her limit and that what she was doing wasn't safe. The little girl managed to get her head above water for a few seconds, gasping desperately for air. Her eyes were wide with fear and she was clearly exhausted. But before she could catch her breath properly, her mother grabbed her shoulders and forced her back down. The woman told me that her daughter needed to push through it because that's how you get stronger. She rudely told me to mind my own business. I explained that I was a certified lifeguard and that this was my business. I warned her that what she was doing could seriously hurt her daughter, that she could pass out or worse. The woman's face turned bright red, and she started yelling loud enough for half the pool to hear. She screamed at me, asking how I dared tell her how to parent her child. She insisted she knew what she was doing, and that her daughter was going to make the team and needed to be tough. She angrily told me I had no right to interfere with her training methods. Other pool patrons were starting to stare, and some were moving their own children away from the area. The little girl was still underwater, and I could see her starting to struggle more desperately. I told the woman again that her daughter was at her capacity and couldn't take this anymore. I begged her to let the child up for air. That's when she completely lost it. She screamed at me to get out of her face, claiming I didn't know anything. She yelled that she'd been swimming since she was 5 years old and knew exactly what her daughter could handle. I had seen enough. I quickly signaled to my colleague at the other end of the pool and then walked over to the pool office to get the manager. When I explained the situation to him, his face went pale. The manager, a guy in his 50s who'd been running pools for decades, came out immediately. He approached the woman, who was still forcing her daughter to stay underwater for dangerous lengths of time. He politely but told her she needed to stop what she was doing immediately. He explained that what she was describing wasn't proper swim training, but was dangerous and could cause her daughter to drown. The woman called the whole situation ridiculous and insisted that everyone was being dramatic. She kept saying her daughter was fine. The manager told her that no, her daughter was not fine and that she couldn't continue doing this in their facility. He explained that if she wanted to work on swimming techniques, there were proper ways to do it that didn't put her child at risk. The woman stared at him for a moment, and I could see her getting angrier by the second. Then she climbed out of the pool, dripping wet, and started walking straight toward me with her fists clenched. She yelled that this was all my fault and that I had ruined everything. She raised her hands like she was going to strike me. In that moment, my years of martial arts training kicked in automatically. I didn't even think about it. I simply used a basic defensive technique to redirect her momentum and gently but put her on the ground. She went down easily, clearly not expecting any resistance. The pool went completely silent except for the sound of the filters running. Karen lay there for a moment, stunned, before starting to scream even louder. She yelled about assault, claiming I had attacked her for no reason. She threatened to call the police and sue the place. The manager had already called 911 while this was happening, and within minutes, 2 police officers arrived. Several witnesses came forward immediately to explain what they had seen: the woman forcing her daughter underwater, her aggressive behavior, and how she had tried to attack me first. The first officer asked me to explain what had happened. I told them the entire situation from the beginning, staying calm and factual. The manager backed up my story, and at least 4 other pool patrons volunteered as witnesses. Karen loudly protested that I had attacked her for no reason, insisting she was just helping her daughter practice swimming. But the witnesses immediately contradicted her story. One parent said that wasn't what happened at all, explaining that Karen had been drowning her poor child, and when I tried to help, she went after me. Another witness mentioned having kids herself and said what Karen was doing was definitely not normal training. She pointed out that the little girl had been terrified. The officers took statements from everyone and reviewed the pool security camera footage. It was pretty clear what had actually happened. One of the officers told Karen that, based on what they'd seen and heard, she was the one who had started the physical contact, and that I had been defending myself. They asked if I wanted to press charges for assault, but honestly, I just felt sorry for the little girl who had been watching this whole thing unfold. She was wrapped in a towel, still shaking, and looked absolutely mortified. I told them I didn't want to press charges and that I just wanted to make sure the little girl was okay. But the officers weren't done. After talking among themselves and taking more witness statements about what had happened with the child, they made another call. The first officer explained that based on what they'd witnessed regarding the treatment of the minor child, they were going to have Child Protective Services do a welfare check. Karen protested loudly, asking if they were serious. She insisted she was just training her daughter and that every good athlete has to push through discomfort. The second officer explained that what witnesses had described wasn't training but was endangering a child's safety. He pointed out that deliberately forcing a child to hold their breath beyond their capacity could have resulted in serious injury or death. The officers issued her a citation for disturbing the peace and took a report about the incident involving her daughter. They also banned her from the pool property indefinitely. When they were wrapping things up, I noticed the little girl had finally stopped shaking. She looked up at me with these big, grateful eyes and quietly thanked me for helping her. She whispered that she had been really scared and didn't think she could hold her breath any longer. 2 days later, I heard from the manager that Child Protective Services had indeed followed up on the case. Apparently, this wasn't the first time they'd received reports about Karen's extreme parenting methods. The little girl was temporarily placed with relatives while they investigated further. Karen tried to come back to the pool the following week, apparently forgetting about the ban. When security reminded her she wasn't allowed on the property, she caused another scene, but this time, the police were called immediately. She was arrested for trespassing. I later learned that the investigation revealed a pattern of dangerous behavior. Karen had been forcing her daughter into extreme training regimens for months, not just with swimming but with other activities too. The girl had been too scared to tell anyone because her mother had convinced her this was normal and necessary to be successful. My grandmother started this bakery 30 years ago, and when she passed last year, my family decided to keep it running. I took over managing the front counter while my uncle handles most of the baking. We're not making millions, but we love what we do, and the community seems to appreciate having a local bakery. The pay isn't amazing, but I genuinely enjoy the work. There's something satisfying about seeing customers light up when they see a perfectly decorated cake or smell fresh bread coming out of the oven. Most of our customers are wonderful people who understand that we're a small business trying our best, but every now and then someone walks through that door who makes me question humanity. Last month, this woman came in on a Tuesday afternoon. She looked like she had money. She told me she needed something really special for her little angel's birthday party that weekend. Her son was turning 8 and she wanted all the other moms to be impressed. I asked her what size cake she was thinking and if she had any flavor preferences. She said she wanted our largest size and wanted it to look expensive. She requested extra frosting, fancy sugar flowers, maybe some gold details. She made it clear that money was no object when it came to her son. I wrote down all her specifications. She wanted chocolate cake with vanilla buttercream covered in elaborate decorations. The total came to about $150, which is expensive for our small bakery, but she didn't even blink at the price. She said it was perfect and that she'd pick it up Saturday morning at 10. She paid in full and left. My uncle and I spent hours on that cake. We used our best ingredients, crafted delicate sugar flowers by hand, and even added some edible gold leaf details. It was honestly one of the most beautiful cakes we'd ever made. When she came to pick it up Saturday morning, she seemed thrilled. She gushed about how perfect it was and how much her son was going to love it. She thanked us repeatedly as she walked the cake out to her car. I felt proud of our work and happy that we'd made someone's special day even better. The next day, Sunday afternoon, I was working alone while my uncle was in the back preparing for Monday's orders. The front door suddenly slammed open so hard it made the little bell above it ring frantically. It was the same woman from yesterday, but she looked completely different. Her face was red, and she was carrying what remained of the cake we'd made. I say what remained because there wasn't much left. Maybe a quarter of the original cake was still in the box, and even that was just scattered crumbs and smears of frosting. It looked like a tornado had hit it. She walked up to the counter and shoved the destroyed cake box toward me. She started yelling that the cake had completely ruined her son's party and demanded a full refund right away. I apologized and asked her to tell me what the problem was. She claimed the cake was stale and tasted terrible. She said nobody wanted to eat it, that her guests were embarrassed for her, and that her son was humiliated. She insisted it was completely unacceptable. I looked down at the mostly empty cake box. The evidence didn't exactly support her story. I told her I understood her concern, but I had to ask how most of the cake got eaten if it tasted so bad. She got defensive and asked what I was trying to say, demanding to know if I was calling her a liar. I assured her I wasn't calling her anything, just trying to understand what happened. I asked if the cake seemed stale when she picked it up yesterday, or if she noticed any problems then. She snapped that she shouldn't have to inspect every little detail because that was my job. She accused us of selling her a stale cake and then trying to blame her for not catching our mistake. I apologized again but explained that our policy doesn't allow refunds on cakes that have already been consumed. I pointed out that most of this cake had been eaten. She got even angrier and said she didn't care about our stupid policy. She started ranting about how the customer is always right and how she paid good money for this disaster. I tried to stay calm and explained that the fact her guests ate most of the cake suggested they found it enjoyable. I said if it was truly stale and inedible, I would expect to see a full cake returned. She was furious at this point, asking how I dared question her. She suggested that maybe people were just being polite or hungry enough to choke it down. She kept insisting that she paid for a quality product and we failed to deliver. At this point, my uncle heard the commotion and came out from the back room. He asked if everything was all right. The woman immediately turned to him, saying finally someone with authority had arrived. She complained that I was being completely unreasonable about a cake that was stale and that I was refusing to give her money back. My uncle told her he had made that cake himself on Friday evening and it was fresh when she picked it up. He said he had to agree with me that if the cake was truly inedible, we wouldn't be looking at an empty box right now. She called the whole situation ridiculous and said she'd never been treated so poorly in her entire life. She accused us of having no idea how to run a business. I tried to stay professional, saying we appreciated all feedback from customers, but we stood behind the quality of our products. I reminded her that the cake was fresh when it left our bakery and her party guests enjoyed it enough to eat almost all of it. She said fine, if we wanted to play hardball, she was going to post about this experience on every social media platform she could find. She threatened to tell everyone in town about how we sell stale cakes and then refused to take responsibility. She promised to make sure everyone knew what kind of business we ran. My uncle said that it was her right to do that, but we were confident in our work and our reputation in the community. She grabbed the empty cake box and walked toward the door, yelling that we'd be hearing from her again and that this wasn't over. The door slammed behind her, making that poor little bell ring frantically again. My uncle and I just looked at each other for a moment. He said, well, that was something. I asked if he thought she'd actually try to ruin us online. He told me that people like that are all bark and no bite. He also pointed out that anyone who knows us knows we'd never sell a stale cake. He was right. It's been over a month now and we haven't seen hide nor hair of any negative reviews or social media drama. Our regular customers are still coming in, still happy with our products. If anything, business has been better than ever. What bothers me most about the whole situation is how entitled she acted. Like the rules that applied to everyone else just didn't apply to her. She got exactly what she paid for, a beautiful, delicious cake that her party guests enjoyed. But somehow in her mind she deserved to eat the cake and get her money back too. I'm 23 and still living at home with my parents and siblings. I know what you're thinking, but with rent prices these days and me saving up for my own place, it just makes sense. Our house has 5 people sharing one laundry room, which sounds like a nightmare, but we've always made it work with basic common sense and respect. The setup is pretty standard: one washer, one dryer, and an unspoken rule that everyone follows. If someone leaves their clothes in the machines and you need to use them, you can carefully move their stuff to keep things flowing. We've been doing this for years without any problems. My parents work long hours, my 2 younger siblings are in high school and always busy with activities, my older sister has her job, and I'm juggling work and college classes. Nobody has time to babysit their laundry loads. My older sister thinks she's in charge of everything just because she's the oldest. She's got this attitude like she owns the house and everyone else is just living in it. Most of the time I just roll my eyes and ignore it, because picking fights isn't worth the drama. But then came the day that changed everything. I had just gotten home from my morning shift at work and needed to wash my uniform for the next day. I went down to the laundry room and found the washer full of my sister's clothes. The cycle had finished hours ago. I could tell because the clothes were getting that damp, musty smell that happens when wet laundry sits too long. Following our family's usual routine, I carefully moved her clothes to the dryer and started it up. I wasn't rough with them or anything. I actually made sure to shake out each piece so they wouldn't wrinkle. I thought I was being helpful. 20 minutes later, she came storming into the kitchen like I had committed some terrible crime. She yelled at me about never touching her laundry again, no matter how long it had been sitting there. She told me to just leave it alone from now on. I tried to explain that I was actually helping her out by preventing her clothes from getting that gross wet smell. I told her that her clothes were sitting there getting damp and I was just trying to help. But she cut me off completely and made it crystal clear that she didn't want to hear any excuses. She demanded that I leave her stuff alone from now on. Fine. Message received loud and clear. 2 weeks passed and I had completely forgotten about the whole incident. I was focused on my own life, work was getting busier, and I had midterms coming up. Then one Thursday morning I woke up planning to do my laundry before heading to my afternoon classes. I went downstairs and found the washer completely full of my sister's clothes. The cycle had finished, but instead of moving them like she usually would, she had just left them there and gone out for the entire day. I stood there looking at the soaking wet clothes blocking the machine I needed to use. For a split second, I considered moving them like I always used to. Then I remembered her exact words from 2 weeks earlier. She had been very specific about never touching her laundry again, no matter how long it had been sitting there. So I did exactly what she told me to do. Nothing. I grabbed my laundry basket and walked to the laundromat 3 blocks away. It cost me $8 and 2 hours of my day. But hey, I was following orders. Hours ticked by. I came back from classes that evening and walked past the laundry room. Her clothes were still sitting there in the washer, now going on 12 hours of soaking in their own dampness. I shrugged and went upstairs to study. The next morning I was eating breakfast when I heard this horrible shrieking coming from downstairs. My sister's voice echoed through the entire house when she discovered what had happened to her clothes. Heavy footsteps stomped up the stairs and she appeared in the kitchen doorway looking absolutely furious. She was holding up what used to be a bright white shirt that was now a dingy grayish color. She demanded to know why I hadn't moved her laundry and complained that her favorite hoodie smelled disgusting and all her white clothes were ruined. She was practically shouting at me like this was somehow my fault. I finished chewing my cereal and looked up at her. I reminded her that she had told me never to touch her laundry and explained that I was just following her orders. The anger drained from her face when the realization hit her. She had demanded I never touch her clothes, and I had done exactly what she asked. She couldn't be mad at me for following her explicit instructions. She opened her mouth like she was going to argue, but then stopped herself. She started to say that she didn't mean it that way, but the words died in her throat. I pointed out that she had been pretty clear about wanting me to leave her laundry alone no matter how long it sat there. So that's exactly what I did. She stood there for another few seconds, probably trying to figure out how to argue with her own logic. Finally, she just turned around and walked away slowly, still holding her destroyed hoodie. From that day forward, she never left her laundry sitting in the machines again. She set timers on her phone and actually paid attention to when her cycles finished. Even better, when she knew she was going to be busy or running late, she started asking me if I could help switch her loads over. She would come up to me and politely ask if I could move her stuff to the dryer when it finished because she was going to be stuck in traffic or busy with something else. I would always tell her it was no problem and help her out. It's funny how a little taste of what happens can completely change someone's attitude. She learned that being entitled and making unreasonable demands doesn't work when the other person is willing to follow those demands to their logical conclusion. The laundry room runs smoothly now, and we're back to our old system of helping each other out. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.